Okay, good morning everybody. It is Sunday and we are on week 29 of our study of the book of Genesis. As always, let's go ahead and start with prayer and then we'll dive in and see where God takes us. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time, this place, and this body of believers, this opportunity for us to gather together in your name and to open your word and invite you to speak to us through the word. Father, we want to just make sure that we're submitting to you, that your Spirit guides us and leads us, that the words that are spoken and the words that are heard, that they all come from you. Father, we're only human, so we're not going to get this perfect, but you are the God of dealing with imperfect things and working out perfect results. So we invite you to be that. We ask that you open our hearts and our minds to receive your word, and that you would change us and draw us closer to who you are in a closer, more personal relationship. Father, we ask you to bless this time and bless each and every one of us and the homes that are represented here, and be blessed by us. In Jesus' name, amen. So, take that brief moment where we do the review screens. And I'll give enough time so that when James is doing his editing later, he doesn't have to try to jump in, jump out. And these are the last 8 weeks, I guess. And that brings us to today's review. Last week was week 28, also known as Fun with Genealogies, which I never thought I'd put together in one phrase. Thought we'd get further last week, but we got into all the genealogies and had more fun with that than I ever anticipated. But that's good. I like it. But quick review of chapter 46. Jacob and his family head to Egypt with all they owned, as opposed to leaving it behind like Pharaoh said. And then right after we get that, we have this whole line of who went... Oh, well, let me just read this. List of who went to Egypt, who already was in Egypt, who all ended up in Egypt, all of whom was related to whom. The grammar on that is awkward. In Egypt, like who all was related. Anyway, everyone was listed in detail except the wives of the sons. Not really sure why, except that they ended up with the number 70 and they didn't want to mess up like a good thing. I don't know. Except for the wife of Joseph, who was mentioned by name and family and anyway. And then I think I just put who was in Egypt because there was so much of that already. So we got, and all that silliness aside, because it apparently wasn't that funny anyway. We have that whole section of the chapter, which is basically just to make sure you know who they were, the family line that was in there, who went in there, but it also has to do with what goes on later on, and it's important information. But also, it's just the line of Israel, just the line of Jacob. It's not the line of Esau, it's not the line of Ishmael. It is the bloodline of the chosen that God is going to do his work through. Like, this is all still part of like laying things out for the coming of the Messiah one day. And what's interesting is that this was so important to them at this point, and when this is written, I mean, this is like thousands of years before the Messiah is born. All they knew was it was important. Like the Spirit inspired, these are things that you need to keep track of. Now, who you were and who you belong to is always important. Like it's built into who we are. That's why you see someone finds out that they were adopted. Like many people in that situation have this deep, like built-in desire to find out like who their biological parents are, because I mean somehow that's psychologically tied. Like who I am is who I'm from, and that's built in. But in all of this works to our advantage, to our benefit, because it's all needed to give us the evidences that we need. These are the promises God made and how he's going to lay out how it's going to be done. And because they put all this detail in, we can track. You go into Matthew and Luke and you can track a genealogy all the way back to David, and then one all the way back to Adam. They kept meticulous records, and it's throughout all of it. And so that's there. So setting that aside, when they were on their way Jacob sent Judah on ahead to go like make arrangements and tell them like we're on our way. We'll be here. And so Joseph comes out and meets the family in the land of Goshen, which is, all right, let me just put this in my head. I wish I'd pulled a map, but like you've got the land of Egypt, and Ramesses would have been right here, and the land of Goshen is right next door. It's part of Egypt, but Ramesses would be like the capital where the Pharaoh is, and Goshen is literally like the next county over, like distance-wise. Fairly uninhabited. It's good pasture land. It's rich land, perfect for cattle and for herds and sheep and such. Also has the advantage of it's there, it's close, but it's separate enough that they can have all this space and be what they are without encroaching on the Egyptians' sensibilities. And Joseph, so he meets them there, sets them up there, and then gives them advice on how to talk to Pharaoh. Like make sure that you tell them you're keepers of livestock, that your family is keepers of livestock, and emphasize this. But you got to understand that to the Egyptians, shepherds they're loathsome. It's like, in fact, I think one translation actually lists it as an abomination, which probably has something to do with the type of worship they did. Like several of their gods have the heads of animals, including like the head of a cow on one. In fact, in Exodus, when they talk about having to go and make sacrifices, they had to make sure they do it far away from Egypt, because you start sacrificing cows in a land where they worship cows, you're going to have problems. So anyway, so this is who they are and what they do is a reason to keep them kind of separate from the Egyptians. And keeping them separate is important. Again, we're talking about that bloodline. We're talking about God's chosen people, as opposed to just being mixed in with everybody else. So as we go into today's reading, once again, looking for the God of love in this passage, looking for evidence of his love, looking for God's purpose in preserving the word, like what's he trying to tell us about him, and then again, how does this passage apply to my life? Because sometimes you read these things and it's like, okay, regulations on how to treat your donkey, or whether or not you're somebody like your neighbor's bull has just killed your sheep or something like that. It's like, but there are principles behind the what we're reading that can apply to our lives today. So we want to look for those as well. So that puts us at chapter 47. Yay. Again, I'm in the New American Standard Bible. There's a 2020 edition, just in case you want to read along. I will say, again, and just kind of a reminder, but I honestly feel like the NIV might be a better translation, more accurate translation. But the New American Standard is more delicate on certain interpersonal phrasings. Had relations with is considerably easier to say than the more frank expression, and I've spent too many years teaching kids to be comfortable reading certain lines. But the New American Standard is still a very a reasonably accurate translation. I've enjoyed getting into it, but I think when we go into the next one, I'll probably be going back to the NIV. It's just a little bit less formal in its phrasing, a little bit easier to follow. None of that's really important. Genesis 47. Then Joseph went in and told Pharaoh. Again, we're talking about like Joseph's already told them this is how you should talk, so he's going ahead to kind of prepare the way. Then Joseph went in and told Pharaoh and said, "My father and my brothers and their flocks and their herds and all that they have come out of the land of Canaan. And behold, they are in the land of Goshen." And he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. I find it very interesting that they don't say which 5. He just took 5 men. He doesn't even say, it's like took 5 men from among his brothers, not 5 of his brothers. So it's like interesting phrasing to me. But also, he starts all this off. There's no hiding anything. There's no confusion here. It's like my family's here with their herds, and they're in Goshen. So he's already like all the cattle and stuff and the property that Pharaoh said you don't need to do that. It's like make sure they did bring it. They do all have it, but I've got them over here in Goshen.
It's almost like he's putting words in his mouth.
Yeah, it's like he's putting it out here and putting it there. So I mean, he's
sign off ready.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, like let's lay this out. It's kind of like you don't ever want to come to somebody with just a problem. You want to come to them with a solution as well. So Joseph is laying out the problem and the solution at the same time. And Joseph can pretty much do no wrong in Pharaoh's sight. So lots of favor there. But anyway, he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" So they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, both we and our fathers." They also said to Pharaoh, "We have come to reside in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now, therefore, please let your servants live in the land of Goshen." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is at your disposal. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them live in the land of Goshen." So now he's basically said, it put the official seal, like he said, he just signed off on it. Let them live in the land of Goshen. And if you know any capable men among them, then put them in charge of my livestock. And on that, I can't help but think, but like Pharaoh's saying, this is Joseph. And Joseph's amazing. And these are his family. These guys might be like him. So if there's some more like Joseph, I want to know. If you've got anybody who's particularly good, then put them in charge of my livestock too.
But I imagine that might have caused some strain between the guys that were already doing that job. That they're going to get
possibly, but again, Pharaoh is Pharaoh. If you have a problem with it, you might not have any problems tomorrow. I mean, this is Pharaoh who was displeased with his baker and impaled him on a pole. So, like, there are strains and there are strains. Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And I want to pause right there because it's really important to recognize that blessings came from one greater to one lesser. When Abraham met with Melchizedek, Melchizedek blessed Abraham, and Abraham accepted it. Now, for Jacob to walk in here like this, and for him to bless Pharaoh, is Jacob, who's the head of a family of shepherds, offers a blessing to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh received the blessing. This is kind of extraordinary to me. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and this is Pharaoh's response. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many years have you lived?" My dad always read it like different translation. One of them says like, "How old are you?"
Thanks for blessing me.
Yeah, well, not only that, but I mean, I can't imagine like what Jacob looks like. Like, the years of my living abroad, or the years that I have, are 130. He's 100, and listen, he's still got time to go. He's not dead yet. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life, nor have they attained the years that my fathers lived during the days that they're living abroad. So basically saying like it's been unpleasant, it's been hard, but I haven't lived, like I'm not even close to what my fathers have lived to. We are a long-lived people. But he's old enough, and apparently looks old enough, that age would give him a certain amount of, standing. I mean, when someone comes in who looks like they may have seen the flood, and he offers you a blessing, you take that. I mean, you just do. You honor the elderly, especially when you think about what the lifespans of people generally are. No healthcare, no amenities like we would even consider necessary. Now the Egyptians were pretty keen up on like medicines and things like that, but a lot of their knowledge was really aimed at embalming, the death process. So it's their idea of preservation was after death, and here's Jacob, who could be, well, he's like 100 years older than, nearly 100 years older than Joseph at this point. I mean, he's ancient, and he walks in and like, "How old are you?" I just love that picture in my head.
I wonder also, he probably spoke with a lot of wisdom, don't you think, when he was blessing him?
Probably. I find it interesting that they don't include the blessing itself. It just says he blessed him. But, I mean, to have survived that long, just survived that long is incredible. But to survive that long and be the head of a family, also potentially to have been the one who raised Joseph, who Pharaoh thinks so highly of. I mean, and then all these other brothers and all the cattle and all the riches. I mean, there's probably been a detailed explanation of what's been brought into Pharaoh's land, more than what we're seeing here.
The pharaohs didn't live very long either.
Well, yeah, aside from the fact that they lived lifestyles that were not what we would call godly, they also... they also had enemies. They didn't make friends when they're going through impaling people just because they upset them, gave them bad bread. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh, it says it again, and went out from his presence. Now Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them property in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had ordered. Now, like I was saying, Ramesses is here and Goshen is here. So Goshen is kind of like I guess like the next county over, but it's like Ramesses, it's like a suburb of it, or it's hard to explain, but it's right next to where Pharaoh has his seat of office, as Pharaoh had ordered. Joseph also provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food according to the number of their little ones. And I think that's interesting. It's not by standing, but it's like he's providing for their families. I mean, this may be a phrasing just to say like he's provided not just, he isn't just a blank amount or arbitrary amount. He's found out what their families need for their children to be raised and raised well. Because also, again, we're thinking about a time where child mortality is much higher than it is today. Infant mortality, like children surviving, like even the first couple of years of their lives was huge. And he's not just giving food for the families; he's giving food to ensure that the children have everything they need to be nourished and raised.
And also, there's a famine, so food is scarce.
Right.
He's not going to just.
And also,
it's Joseph. Remember?
Yeah, right. But it's he didn't just dump food on him. He gave it by accounting. But in many cultures, especially, I mean, if you think about the land of Canaan, eventually Canaan is going to be known for the worship of the false gods, but a major practice, child sacrifice. In some cultures, the children were valued tremendously. In other cultures, they were not. And this is very, very much showing the value of the children and the generations. Also, God's got this promise, like you'll be fruitful and multiply. You'll be many nations. And Joseph is making sure to ensure this. Now, there was no food in all the land. Okay, so what we basically got, we've had this story, basically since Joseph showed up in Genesis. The story has gone from Jacob and veered off to Joseph. And we'll follow Joseph, and then we'll get these flashbacks or these snaps over to Jacob's household, like the whole business with Judah and Tamar. And then we come back to Joseph. And then we come back to Jacob and the sons who go to Egypt. So we got this back and forth, back and forth. It's almost like we've got this story that's split, and we keep going trying to wrap things up. And what we've just done is we've tied up the loose ends. So like we've wrapped up the Joseph's family, and now we're going back to Joseph's story himself to wrap up the famine situation. Because we had the 7 years of good, 7 years of bad. And so now it's like the person who's written all this down is tying up these loose ends. And what we'll end up having is wrap up all the details with the famine in Egypt, and then the book of Genesis will actually end with the finalizing of Jacob's days and Joseph's days. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. So now there was no food in all the land because the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. And Joseph collected all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in payment for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. Again, Pharaoh really liked Joseph.
Why is the in payment in italics?
I do not know. It's Joseph collected all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan in payment for the... It may be one of those things where they've inserted it instead of just having collected all the land of Canaan for the grain, like they brought in... Yeah, just a clarification. A lot of times, and actually it's a very good thing to ask. Like anytime you see something set up in italics, or you'll see something underlined, or you'll see these little asterisks or footnote markers, check them out. Sometimes, especially in the NASB, the New American Standard, all they'll do is they'll go through, you'll take a look at them and they'll give you the literal translation. Like they've given you this, but they'll give you what it literally says. It's basically, like every time you see the word food in this whole chapter, the original word was bread. But it was bread as though, like our daily bread is food for the day. But anytime you see something that stands out in Scripture, it's a good idea to check out and see what it does, what it affects. And turns out many of the translations of the Bible that we read will have things in there to let you know what choices they made and why. And then they'll give you the original so that you can determine for yourself. I've actually been doing some reading and some research on how people do the translations, and I don't always agree with their choices, but I have to respect the amount of work and sincerity that went into making the choices. It's pretty extraordinary. Anyway, in here I believe it's just a clarification. I mean, if you took it out, like the in payment out, and read it, and Joseph collected all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought. So in payment for the grain is almost, it's not really necessary. It's like they stuck it in there just to make sure it was clear. Clarification. But I haven't researched that, so it might be something worth looking into. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. When the money was all spent in the land of Egypt, and obviously this is by the Egyptians, not by Pharaoh, because the money's still there, and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph saying, "Give us food, for why should we die in your presence? For our money is gone." Now, just to emphasize what we were just talking about, I'm going to click this. And again, you'll see a lot of times in a lot of different translations, you'll click and they'll just show you, "Give us food" or "bread." And they just do that to make sure that you can see where they came from and why they chose the words they chose. Because when you get like a literal translation that gives you word for word, then you lose what they mean by idioms. Like, I think the classic one is that in English, if you say, "I'm going to go catch the bus," I mean, anybody who speaks English understands what you mean is you're going to go meet up with the bus stop and get on the bus and go. But literally, it sounds like you're trying to go, either somebody's throwing it and you're going to catch it, or you're going to go capture it, and that's not the case. And in translating, if you try to do things literally, you can miss some of the things that are expressed. Like calling just bread, it's not like that's all they got. They didn't just get bread, they got food, so that's why they chose this. But they left a little mark in there so that you can see where they got it and where their choice was. Interesting thing here, though, says that "for our money is gone," and this is a little thing, but it's like literally it says "for our money is at an end." It means the same thing, but another translation says "for our money has ceased," and this is one of the reasons why it's a good thing to have multiple translations out when you're studying. I'm not saying to do that when you're just reading through, but you can kind of get, if we go "our money is gone," or "our money is at an end," or "our money has ceased," when you kind of take all of those concepts together, you got, it's not just the money is gone, it's like it's not flowing anymore. There's no way to get any more. We're out. We're out and completely out. So they're saying, we need food. We have no way to get any money to pay for it, and why should we die right here in front of you? Then Joseph said, "Give up your livestock, and I will give you food for your livestock, since your money is gone." So he's saying, okay, you're going to die. Your animals are going to die. You've got no way to get food for them. So instead, turn them over to me, and I'll provide food. Like, you'll live, you'll continue. Like, the livestock will continue now because They'll belong to somebody who can take care of them, and you'll be okay because you'll have the food. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses and the flocks and the herds and the donkeys. And he fed them with the food. And you see you got these little bubbles everywhere on here, and it's pretty much just the same words and just showing that. And it said he gave them food in exchange for the horses and the flocks and the herds and the donkeys. And he fed them with food in exchange for all the livestock that year. One translation actually puts this like he shepherded them. He took care of them the way a shepherd takes care of his flock. So it wasn't just that he gave food, he ensured that they had enough to eat throughout the year. So it wasn't like, I mean, you can look at this one way where he's like, okay, you're in a bad spot, so I'm going to take everything you own. He gave them a good deal. It wasn't just that they survived, he took care of them. Well, you can kind of see that from their attitude in a minute too. But when that year ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, "We will not hide from my lord the fact that our money is all spent." It's kind of old news at this point. "And the livestock are my lord's. There is nothing left for my lord except our bodies and our lands. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we and our land will be slaves to Pharaoh. So give us seed, so that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate." So now, again, we're getting close to the end of the famine. Doesn't mean that nothing is growing. It's just that almost nothing is growing. But they're saying, basically, we got nothing left. So we'll offer you is the land that we have and our own service. And we also have to stop and realize that the use of the word slave does not have the same connotation at this time as it does in our country now. They were subject to Pharaoh, but now they become Pharaoh's property. Pharaoh's sovereignty increases even further. But they're basically saying that everyone now works for Pharaoh, and that Pharaoh will own all the land. It won't just be stuff that's subject to him. He'll actually have ownership of the entire land of Egypt. But they say, do this so that we can live, and so the land won't go barren. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, and for every Egyptian sold his field, because the famine was severe upon them. And now their point of view is like, I can't do anything with it anyway. It's like, I can die here in the land die too, or we can go to the one place where there's some hope for this. And so he bought it. As for the people, he relocated them to the cities from one end of Egypt's border to the other. Now, this is a huge restructuring of Egypt. These people who were kind of like isolated communities that were under Pharaoh now became Pharaoh's, and he actually took them, like, you've given up your land. And this is really smart, actually. If say they sold their land, but they still lived on their family land, when things got better, what are they likely to start thinking about? Like, this was mine before. So Joseph takes all these people and he relocates them. It's like, and in this particular time, like, these people, all they're thinking is, and they've already been willing to give up everything else, they're starving. And he's going to bring them to places where there's food. And then he redistributes everybody to where they need to be based on his own wisdom. So, like, Egypt is about to be restructured to be a far more efficient and prosperous nation, because one guy is basically going to be allocating and setting all the workers up in a bunch of different places. But again, he's taking these people off of their land and putting them somewhere else, so that when things do get better, it's all due to Pharaoh, and they're not sitting somewhere that they think that they already have right to. So your chance of uprising and rebellion is going to be much less. Right. Like, they're not. It's really easy for us when things are hard. We turn, say, even in our own lives, we turn to God when things are hard. Our prayer lives are tremendous when things are tough. But look at even the best intentions. With even the best intentions, when things get better, we kind of slip back into old habits. That's fallen human nature. And what Joseph is doing is kind of circumventing that. It's like they can't fall back into old habits because they don't live there anymore. They're going to find new ones, obviously, but not those.
Also, they became Pharaoh's workforce.
Yes. Everybody, but see, in their minds, it's like, I work for Pharaoh, but he feeds me every day. In fact, this is such a good argument that when the Israelites left Egypt and they got hungry, they're like, well, at least in Pharaoh's service, I was fed every day. This is a very effective tool. What's interesting is all the land of Egypt became slaves to Pharaoh, but in the next book over, the only slaves you hear about are the Israelites. But there's reasons for that, but we already did that study. As for the people, he relocated them to the cities from one end of Egypt's border to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, because the priests had an allotment from Pharaoh, and they lived off the allotment which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, they did not sell their land. So the priests become their own power base. They already were, because they're kind of the connection to the gods that the Egyptians worship. And that gets even more significant later on as they get to a Pharaoh who never knew Joseph. But so they're kind of separate. Then Joseph said to the people, behold, today I have purchased you and your land for Pharaoh. Now, here is seed for you, and you may sow the land. At the harvest you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be for your own, for seed of the field and for your food, and for those of your households, and as food for your little ones. So they said, you have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's slaves. So he set all this up. Then he gives them stuff so they can still make their own living. They went from we're starving to death to they've sold themselves, but now he's turning stuff back over to them. It's like all we're asking for is a fifth. 4/5 of it is yours to keep. Now they have, as purchased people, they don't really have anything to expect except the bare necessities or whatever. And he's saying basically, you can do this, and all I'm asking for is a fifth. Like 4/5 is yours.
He keeps their dignity.
Yes, and gives them a chance to make for themselves. Like the better you do, I mean, a fifth of whatever you get goes there, and 4/5 is yours. But the bigger your total production, the more you get to keep. And it's land that you thought like it's land, and you didn't even know if you'd live, let alone be able to work land again. So he's giving them opportunities. He's giving them incentives, and he's also setting Pharaoh up to have a constant income and resource as well. So they said, you have saved our lives. Verse 26, Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, valid to this day, that Pharaoh was to have the fifth. Only the land of the priests did not become Pharaoh's. Now Israel lived in the land of Egypt, in Goshen, and they acquired property in it, and were fruitful and became very numerous. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years, so that the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. So 17 years after Jacob blesses Pharaoh, he lives that much longer in the land. So we're probably looking at anywhere from 15 years after the famine was done. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt. The 17 years is interesting because if we look back, Joseph was 17 when he was sold into slavery. And so he had 17 years at the beginning of Joseph's life, and then he had 17 more years at the end of his own life, again in Joseph's company, in Joseph's presence. When the time for Israel to die drew near, he called his son Joseph and said to him, please, if I have found favor in your sight, place your hand under my thigh now and deal with me in kindness and faithfulness. Please do not bury me in Egypt. But when I lie down with my fathers, you shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. And he said, Joseph said, I will do as you have said. Now just pausing here. And when it says when the time for Israel to die drew near, it doesn't mean that he was on his deathbed right at this moment. It's just he knows his health is failing. the signs are there, and he realizes, I need to get some things in order. I need to establish things while I can still establish things. So then he speaks to Joseph, and this is interesting because, please, if I have found favor in your sight. I mean, this is the patriarch talking to his son, but it's also his son who is second in the land. But he needs a favor. He needs something above and beyond what just a son could do. So he said, don't bury me in Egypt. This isn't home. This is not the land that God promised my fathers. This is not the land that God promised me. Don't bury my bones here. Don't leave me here. Take me and bury my bones where my fathers are buried. Put me back in the place where God promised.
But that land was also sold to Pharaoh.
That the Goshen land is, but the land in Canaan, is the land in Egypt was purchased. Now a lot of the Canaan stuff is as well, but there's still the area that belonged to Abraham and Abraham's family in Machpelah, I think. I have to look that up. But the burial place is still theirs. I probably got that name wrong. But Jacob's thing is, like, I'm here and God's provided for me here, but I'm the recipient of a promise. My identity is of the land that God has promised. He's in the act of burial, he's reminding his people, this isn't home. Like, that's home. That's where the promise is. That's where our fathers are buried. That's where God made all our met us. And yes, our identity is over there, not here. This is a provision place. This isn't home, which is something that has to be overcome later on. But when I lie down with my fathers, you shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. And he said, just said, I will do as you have said. And he said, swear to me. So he swore to him. Then Israel bowed in worship at the head of the bed. Okay, so there's a couple points. I spent a lot of time. I can't give you any definitive stuff, but it's the hand under the thigh issue, which we've talked about before. And then this whole bowed in worship at the head of the bed, which is translated also at he leaned over the top of his staff. So I'm going to throw some options out here and give you the general idea of what's meant here and let you decide how you want to phrase it yourself. But the hand under the thigh, this gets translated or interpreted, better than translated, strangely in a lot of ways. There are certain euphemisms and associations in this day and age with both with strength, because the thigh muscle is a very strong muscle, so there's a sense of strength there, so that's association. But also it is an area, it's referring to an area where reproductive strength is as well. And I think some of those translations get a little bit, or interpretations, I think they're trying too hard. They're getting too caught up on the euphemisms and what it could possibly mean, that I think it misses the general idea. They're focusing too tightly on it. What I want to bring up, what it is basically, it was a common practice, and it had to do with the person making the oath, placing a hand, acknowledging the strength of the other. But if you picture the scene, if you're placing your hand under the thigh, then the person's thigh is someone who's seated. Now, if they're seated and you're coming and putting your hand under the thigh, you're either bowing or you're kneeling before them. It instantly, effectively puts you in a place of submission to someone else. It's also very intimate, and you're very close. You're right there. Presumably also, at least one hand, one way to protect, defend yourself is tied up. It is a complete sign, a posture of submission to someone else. There's generally an oath sworn. In the case of these, they generally swear by the Lord. Abraham did this when he sent his servant to find the wife for Isaac, when he went to go look for Rebekah. So there's a lot of conjecture based on what that could mean. I just want to point out what it actually was. Now, culturally, what all's tied into that, I can't speak to that, but I can say that what you end up with is someone who is bowed or kneeled in a position of submission and vulnerability, who is submitting to the strength of another, and who is swearing an oath. It's a very close oath. It's a very personal thing. Then Israel bowed in worship at the head of the bed. The head of the bed is, the word head can mean a lot of different things, but it's head the way the word captain is a head of something. It's in the forefront. It is the boss, the top, the foremost, that kind of concept. And the word bed can actually mean bed chamber. So even that leaning over the head of the staff, there's the ultimate meaning in this, however you want to pull all these different words together, is there is a point where Jacob basically stops and kneels in worship. Kneels, bows in worship. And it's going to be like if they're in his bedchamber and they're talking, it's as though he stopped at this moment where he's been given this oath. I will do as you have said. I will carry your body. You won't be buried here. I'm going to lay you to rest in home.
That was his promise.
Yeah, that was his promise. That was the oath. And at that point, Jacob turned and bowed in worship. And like he bowed, it's almost like you can picture someone bowing at the head of the bed and just kneeling down and just worshiping God, like a child or even like an adult who kneels by the bed to pray. It's almost like its own personal altar, not in the sense of a sacrifice or whatever, but it's not like he just bowed anywhere. He went somewhere specific. This is a very deliberate worship. In fact, I would almost say that this is a parallel of the oath. Now, this is just kind of occurred to me. But if the oath with a hand beneath the thigh is significant because it requires that you come to the seat, that you bow, that you submit to make that oath. And then what we see right after that oath is made, you see Jacob turning around and bowing in worship and in thanks. It's almost like Joseph has submitted in this way, and then because Jacob has, they got a lot of Jacob. Anyway, Joseph submitted to Jacob, so Jacob immediately submitted to God and gave thanks to where it came, where all these blessings have come from. In his own room, in his own space. Now, if it's a staff is a symbol of authority. If it's his bed, it's his place of rest. Either way, what we see is the submission, and then it's not held there, it's turned around and glory is given to God. This is the heart of the man that God called Israel.
There's humility there.
Tremendous. Basically, the highest ranked man short of Pharaoh has just bowed and sworn an oath to Jacob, and Jacob immediately turns and bows to God. That is a picture that is consistent with the man who was named usurper and was renamed. He struggles with God and prevails. So, to wrap all that up, we see a completion of Jacob's family, Israel's family, being brought into to a location for their preservation. Not only their preservation, but by God's hand and then through Joseph for them to prosper. And in fact, it very clearly says they grew and became numerous. We know based on the beginning of Exodus, they became so numerous it was a point of fear for the authorities at the time. We see that Joseph's wisdom continues and provides. I mean, you might ask, why is God doing so much for Egypt? But again, what was the blessing God gave to Abraham? I will bless them that bless you, and I will curse them that curse you. Egypt has just become a place that has received God's people to take care of God's people. Egypt then becomes a very powerful, prosperous place so that it is equipped to bless the sons of Abraham. Now, when they change that, when they change their relationship with Israel, all of that gets stripped away. Like when they enslave and brutalize Israel, God comes in and says, okay, when you blessed them, you were blessed. When you cursed them, this is what happens. And then we come down here at the end and we see this reminder. This is God's place of provision, but this isn't home. This is God's place of provision. This world we live in, God's providing for us right now. This isn't home. Home is where our fathers, or where our Father is. And so it's important, I think, that we see when things go badly, but also when things go well, that we stop and we bow at the head of the bed in worship. That we give God His glory, give God His honor. And so on that, I will say